There you go. And let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So today's going to be particularly interesting, I think, because it is so close to what we see on a daily basis. So we are here in a collaborative space for the purpose of exploring our current economic principles and to find new ways and tools to move towards a regenerative humanity. We are looking to uncover cooperatively, collaboratively in a co-evolutionary way to uncover or devise new tools or processes that will move our economic and finance systems towards regeneration. Last week, Pam hosted a discussion on multi-factor causality as an extension of the butterfly effect, a large, wonderful, passionate discussion that was. So in this interconnected web, the causes and effects flow through the web through all of the nodes and interconnections. They cascade through, and every node plays a path. You could say that every node translates what it receives based on what it has and moves it forward based on that translation. So no two nodes are doing exactly the same thing. And the message that flows through the web depends on which nodes it hits. Yeah. Today, I'll be discussing tipping points. That's a term that was made popular by Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, I think it was called. The idea that something can happen, something big can happen in the blink of an eye, seemingly in the blink of an eye. But we will use what we have learned about butterfly effect, multi-factor causality, to also understand tipping points. So I'm going to start with something that all of us know and do probably every day, which is boil water. So let's start with water in its ice stage. If we take a cube of ice and we start to heat it in a pan, it'll start to get warmer. As it gets warmer, its temperature rises, obviously, but then it will reach the melting point of ice, which is 0 degrees centigrade, and gets stuck there. At least it seems like it's getting stuck. What's happening is that the heat that is coming into the ice, the energy we're providing, is being used by the ice to change its internal structures and become liquid, to become water. So it's as though it has diverted the energy that it's receiving from the heat, diverted it from increasing the temperature to changing the structure. Yeah? So having reached a liquid state at 0, as we continue to add heat, it gets warmer and warmer and warmer until it reaches 100 degrees centigrade. At 100, the temperature stops again. Now the heat we're providing is changing the internal structure of the liquid in preparation for it to become steam. And then suddenly it has become steam. This behavior, as you can see, which looks like a stair, rather than like a straight line, it looks like a stair, explains how in complex systems, what's going on is not linear. Yeah, it has a non-linear response at certain points in its state. So for example, if we're just dealing with water in our lives, we never see this. It's when we hit the point of freezing or the point of boiling that we come across these, what's called phase transitions of the system, the tipping points. So to go a bit more deeply into it, let's start with water again. We heat it to 100 degrees. The temperature rise stops. The heat is now being used to change the internal structure. The internal structure change is a large event, meaning it's a big change it's a big change, not to the molecular structure, but to the web-like structure of water, where it's going from a liquid, highly dense, highly fluid, highly, what's the word for it? It's sticky, you can say, state, to steam, which is far less fluid, far less dense, and far less sticky. The energy is being used to change the internal structure from water to steam. That energetic, high energy state, that structural change state, is the state of chaos. It is highly sensitive state and highly unstable. What I mean by sensitive means, in that state, the liquid, the water, can be guided in almost any direction. So for example, if we stop heating the water, it will not get to steam. It'll come back to water. But in that highly unstable state, the water can be guided or misguided, if you will, through the chaos and potentially never reach steam. So what I'm trying to state here, that the tipping point, at the tipping point, no, let me rephrase that. Prior to the tipping point comes chaos. In the state of chaos, there's a large amount of energy that is floating around, changing the internal structure. And during that time of change, the internal structure, you could say it has become loose, yeah, because the rate of change is so great and the scale of change is so great. You can say that it's become loose and therefore highly susceptible to all kinds of inputs. Yeah. The diagram at the bottom, what I'm trying to say here is ice, which from prior discussions, you know, that complex systems have porous boundaries. So ice has a porous boundary, which is taking on the external input of heat. It is using that in heat at 0 degrees centigrade to change its internal structures such that it is changing shape, if you will. It is becoming shapeless in a way. But the continued application of heat takes it to the next stage of water, where it now has, once again, that porous boundary and a well-known set of properties, characteristics. You know, water flows, et cetera, those characteristics. Once again, as we continue to heat it, it enters a phase of chaos again, and it tips, it phase transitions to the next stage of steam. The key point is that in the 2 stages of chaos, the system is in a very unstable, one could even say an amorphous stage, where it's neither this nor that. So I've tried to create here a conceptual diagram of the behavior of complex systems. A complex system, so that's the circle with its porous boundaries, has 2 things going on simultaneously. It is receiving and giving out inputs through its porous boundary, but at the same time, there are internal processes taking place, internal feedback loops. The complex system is responding to both its internal perturbations and its external perturbations at the same time. At a phase transition stage, at a tipping point, it can break through into the next stage, or it can break down. Breakdown, of course, happens if the inputs coming in change drastically, or there are other types of influence that suddenly come in during that chaotic phase and cause it to go off the road, off kilter, if you will. Yeah. The next stage, that's the triangle there, is a new and qualitatively different state than the circle. So the phase transition marks a real turning point in the behavior of the complex system. What I want to illustrate here is that the phase transition property of complex systems is its normal way of behaving, is its normal way of achieving large change. While there are also small incremental changes that are taking place, Those we can call linear or and can be analyzed through reductionist methods. So both exist, both are happening. The key point here is that phase transitions are normal in a complex system's life cycle. They are not, as we're being told by many discussions, they're not something that happens by accident. They are not a mistake. They're not something we should be afraid of, or we should be afraid of them because the change is very large, but they are normal in the sense that this is what a complex system does. Yeah. The phase transition can be achieved either through external perturbation, such as heat, or through internal changes. For example, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly is through internal inputs in the natural way of the life cycle of a caterpillar. Same thing, a human child goes through puberty, which is a highly chaotic phase, which we all know, into pre-adulthood. That too is through internal feedback loops, internal processes that we are all born with. Now note, we can disturb that natural flowing from childhood through puberty, through pre-adulthood. We can disturb that, for example, by severe malnutrition or other such conditions. Yeah. So in that chaotic phase, we can disturb a system quite easily. So this is another example. Now, the diagram you will recognize from last week. This is the diagram for multi-causality and butterfly effect. If we apply this to the Me Too movement, the underlying issues that we can say caused the Me Too movement were at play for a long time. There were women speaking out against it for a long time, at least for 20 years. There were little whispers spreading across. People knew it. However, they were deliberately either shut down or mentioned as anecdotal and not really worth pursuing. When all of it came together, so think of it this way, the events and the dissatisfaction kept building, just like heat is applied to water, kept building, 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 until a point came that enough of these emotions connected with each other flowed through the system, and the system tipped into what we now know as the Me Too movement. When it finally tipped over, the scale of this new space, this new era of post-Me Too seemed to be so large that the media and the general population said, where did that come from? Even though the actual impulses have existed for a very long time. Yeah. So the Me Too movement is just an example, but we can see this kind of phenomenon. We have seen it in our lifetimes across many, many things, including, for example, the fall of the USSR. Even the fall of the Berlin Wall was like that. The Arab Spring event, even the economic collapse of 2008 was similar. The calls for climate change action, which just suddenly went from 10% of voices, 20% of voices, to now it's looking like 80, 90% of voices. All of these are going through the same kind of dynamics where the different voices go through the interconnected web. They get picked up by the various agents, the nodes, and then they get amplified or changed in such a way that the entire system tips into a new way of being. So the question we want to ask you today is, now that we have seen the details of phase transition and the chaos that precedes it, what are the tipping points in our current economic system that exists or that you are seeing, or what tipping points we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanuja. This is really such an important concept as we start to try to get a mental handle on what we're seeing going on all around us.
Yeah. I wanted to make a little comment. Pam, you mentioned critical mass in the chat. Nowadays, they're not talking about critical mass so much because mass implies that you need a certain number of nodes. We're talking about critical influence.
Okay.
Where the influence goes through the web in such a way that it resonates with a large number or a certain number of nodes, and that influence is amplified until the entire system tips.
All right.
Yeah. Eric.
I'm just wondering about the, the diagram where you see the, where it goes nonlinear, right?
Yep.
Which can also be viewed as a plateauing of some sort.
Yep.
But my understanding is that actually represents a chaotic state.
Yes. The plateau is in a parameter of measurement. So if we're measuring temperature, the temperature has plateaued, but the activity in the web has not.
Okay. Okay, that helps.
Yeah.
Boy, and that's an interesting analogy for looking at big social change. It appears to be a plateau, but in fact, the energy in the system is still, and really, Tanuja, you didn't use the word resistance, but in fact, what's happening, if you look at the Me Too movement, the 20 years of energy spikes, the small energy spikes that were coming up, were resisted, even at whether at a subconscious level, at a social, but as a social system, because I think that we are somehow wired to resist chaos, to resist change.
Yeah.
And so that's where, whether if we call it critical influence, that's where it takes a critical amount of energy working simultaneously, not in concert necessarily, but simultaneously, to where then the tipping point comes when one phrase that I'm familiar with is, we could no longer ignore it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's written that way. It's interesting when we come across these concepts and then we read media, at least for me. When I read social media or New York Times articles now, and so many phrases assume certain things, as you say, whether it's critical mass or anything else, but all of them assume that the chaos is a bad thing. Yeah, we need to avoid it. We need to run away from it. And that the tipping point is going to lead to something bad. And the big learning here is that complex systems, tipping and chaos, are natural. It is the way it moves. I'm not saying it is the only way it changes. There are incremental ways. There are small changes. But what we call a paradigm shift is the tipping point, and that is the way complex system moves. They're talking about ecosystem collapse. They're talking about species collapse, the collapse of coral systems. Yeah. Even in Greenland, it's not as though the number of icebergs or ice flows melting is moving through a linear way. It's not increasing one at a time. It is collapsing. know? A collapse is a tipping point. To me, to be able to assess when we have reached a tipping point is perhaps one of the biggest challenges for science, mathematics, and physics today, because we are faced with collapses coming up. We just don't know where they're going to be.
They're occurring already.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And to bring it to our economic system, maybe it's foolhardy to imagine that a economic system that requires stability in order to prosper is built up within a natural system that really can't support it. So it's only natural that we're seeing a collapse.
Yeah.
This is to be expected if you understand the natural systems occurring. And so then our question, what we're hoping in these conversations is that we develop ideas about what next, what might be our next ways, our next systems. Our deeper understanding can give us good clues.
Yeah. So Carl has put down the temperature in his name, 104 degrees. So I'm wondering, Carl, are you approaching collapse over there?
No, we're trying to keep the house as cool as possible. This is, just taking a plug for everything that's so important to me, that there are so many natural systems that can even out the collapse. Solar-oriented design, nighttime cooling, Persians making ice in the desert 2,000 years ago. There's so many great examples of how to use nature without our hydrocarbon economy. So there's
do you have any links regarding that, how they made ice?
I'll put one in the chat.
Ago? That'd be great, yeah, because the physics of it would be most interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I'll put something in the chat. And there's actually a really great TED talk, and an engineer from UCLA who I'd love to reach out to when I have time, has developed a cooling system that takes advantage of it. So not being a physicist or a scientist, the physics of it is that the water that changes from liquid to ice, it doesn't have to be brought down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit as we think it does. It's about the radiant exchange between the water and the temperature in the sky. So, and I think you probably understand it better than I do, but it's something it sort of feels like what you're talking about is the change of phases of water or other liquids. It's not a linear process.
I do think that I'm just guessing, Carl, that most of the natural so-called technologies that cool things do it through evaporation of water, but evaporation only works in dry climates.
This isn't an evaporation, but it does only work in dry climates when because energy is not transferred through air with a lot of moisture. So for in a simpler example, what we can take advantage of in California, which is a dry climate, of nighttime summer cooling, is not as efficient in New York or other places where there's humidity.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, Eric.
Yeah, just a quick observation. More kind of in terms of somehow inculcating attitude change, I suppose. Because we acknowledge that people are very resistant to change, particularly when they're occupying those chaotic zones that look like plateaus. And I believe that if you look back to a sort of more basic biology, that it's normal for an organism to expend as little energy as possible.
Yes.
Right. There's a reason people in societies and cultures
Yes.
get stuck in the familiar, right? But there's another way that you can minimize expensive energy. And I think this is where perhaps an attitudinal shift needs to go. And that is shown in the martial arts, right? When you stop resisting the energy, but work with it, or shift so you allow it to pass through, you're not having to put the energy into resistance. And so
Can you repeat the last couple of sentences?
Yeah, so a different way to conserve energy is shown in the martial arts, Aikido, right? Tai Chi in a very passive sense, or a very light sense, where rather than resisting force with force, what you're doing is you receive the energy and allow it to pass through or divert its direction, you dance with it in one way or another, right?
Catch a ride.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing, Pam, is that we can look at a breaking wave in the ocean as a phase change, right? It's a tipping point.
Yes, very much so.
And so who most successfully deals with that wave breaking is a surfer. And so when big change is about us, I think it's learn to surf.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something in that imagery that helps with the sharing of the knowledge.
So
That's
the reason I asked you
beautiful.
to, very good. The reason I asked you to repeat your sentence, Eric, was I think you used the word conserve energy.
Yeah.
But if in our lives we are required to act, to do things, how can we do things without it wasting energy, as Carl pointed out? It's minimum amount of energy. I think that may be the secret to it. And the only way you can do that is to flow, right?
Yes, and that comes back to that as a metaphor.
Yeah. So the surfer has chosen to surf. So he wants to act.
She rides the energy.
Exactly. But what he's done in order to implement his action is to learn the nature of what it is he's acting with. In this case, waves.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's what we're trying to do by saying we are trying to learn the characteristics and properties of living systems.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, and maybe it's actually part of the same thought you're having, is that it's not just the knowledge which learning implies, but it's the perception. It's the ability to perceive the energy and what it's doing as such, right? Because it normally doesn't come across as an electric bill, for instance. It comes across through social dynamics or ecosystem perturbations and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So when we're talking about learning here, we're talking more of a holistic learning here, enlightened learning.
I suppose.
Yeah, the pain is in the resistance.
That's it.
How many of us have heard that term? And as we mature or grow, hopefully we incorporate that understanding more and more into our ways in the world, but it's emphasizing it, right? I mean, really what we've been talking about all these weeks is a whole new, deeper, more scientifically grounded understanding of what is going on around us. And it is once you sort of catch the wave, it all just makes so much sense. And you just feel like, well, of course, that there is of course, that's the way it is and should be, and then making sense of it all.
Yeah. I wondered if I could call upon
Oh, you
Gerd.
know what? Artie just raised her hand. Let's.
Oh, okay,
Hey,
yes,
we-
Artie, go. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about, this whole thing around tipping point and consumerism. And, we've just, I say we, not me, but my community has just been through a period of fasting. And so you fast. For me, the hardest part of the fast is the first half day, right? And when you know you can't eat, that's when you want to eat, or drink or whatever it is. And once you get past that sort of tipping point, your body just becomes accustomed to that, being deprived of sort of food and water. Then it lasts so many days, and then you've got to go and eat or drink again, otherwise you're going to die. So I'm just thinking this whole thing about where we are in, so in terms of using fewer resources, less energy, fewer other natural resources, materials, etc. How do we get people to accept that this is a good thing and that they're actually going to be content without so much materialism? How do we get them to that tipping point?
I wondered if we could use that whole surfer and wave analogy for consumerism as well, and energy, where we say, yes, I want to consume, meaning I need things, I need to buy things, I need to use them, but how can that be in sync with the flow of goods or nature or whatever? Can we think of it like that, such that the act of consumerism is no longer so harmful?
Well, I think it needs to be as easy as falling off a log, right? So we can't really, how do we get people to change? It has to make sense to them. And that's where I think the surfer analogy can be a good one, because if you see someone riding the wave, riding the edge, then that is attractive. You want that. So somehow it has to, I really do believe it has to feel good, make sense, and look attractive for this shift to occur in any way other than tragic. Yeah. So Helena writes, when we talk about consuming more consciously, we often think about products, but a dimension of our consumerism in the 21st century is our consumption of technology, our use of energy. Absolutely. The whole Bitcoin deal, I guess they've come up with some new way that supposedly uses less energy, but really, what is that about? And actually, Gerd, you made an interesting note earlier about how everything in economics is natural resources and labor. Those are the two inputs. So in Web 3, Web 4, energy, technological, electric energy is the input, is the natural resource. How does that work? Will you speak to that?
Well, this is based on an economic model that I've created. It's called the Economics of Choice, economicsofchoice.com. And I will say that I'm in the process of a major upgrade to the website. I'm not happy with it. It doesn't include the Federal Reserve at this point, but it will give you the basis of how I approach the economy in terms of how it functions. And it is rooted in, like I stated in my comment there, that all economic output has only two inputs, natural resources and labor. We spend time transforming natural resources into capital. And then we use that capital to transform additional natural resources into the goods and services that we consume for comfort, survival, and leisure enhancement. So lives are integrally connected with the natural world. Mainstream economic models don't talk about that. And the core fundamental connection is that when natural resources become more scarce, we need to move to a new area, like people did when they were hunter-gatherer societies, or we need to improve our methods of extraction so that they're more efficient. And that's what we've been able to do successfully for many, many decades at this point, is natural resources become more scarce, so we spend time
Capital.
of extractions, the machines that we use and the processes that we use those machines in. And because of that, we've been able to continuously increase our standard of living, and at the same time, that has enabled the human population to increase continuously. At some point, if we continue that process, we are not going to be able to continuously or decrease the amount of time that it takes us to extract and transform natural resources into the goods and services that, we rely on. And our standard of living will decrease when that occurs. In terms of energy, not sure exactly where you want to restate?
Well, when I think of natural resources and labor and transforming natural resources into capital, which then in essence buys labor and ever more efficient, I just wonder about these worlds we've created of wealth that are all in the technological form. There's nothing real to show for it, and nothing real to how is that benefiting us? I truly don't understand when someone gets so excited about Web3 or Web4 and all of these jobs where they're just moving electronic bits from point to point. How is that in any way productive labor or in any way satisfying of any of the what I feel like you were trying to attend to in your comment? So I can't really articulate it very well yet because still
I think one thing that we all need to recognize is that technology improvement has enabled us to live or provided the wonderful opportunities that we have. I mean, the fact that we're sitting here and able to communicate across all over the world is a pretty phenomenal thing. The fact that we are able to get up and take a shower and brush our teeth and not worry, stay clean, and the amount of time that we have to pursue the activities that we really enjoy is really a pretty amazing, wonderful thing, and we need to appreciate it. And it is technology that has enabled us to do that. But at the same time, the natural resources on Earth are limited, scarce, and
Finite.
can't continue. And I mean, it's our capacity to generate energy without manual labor through the transformation of fossil fuels and so on that has really enabled us to live the life that we're able to live at this point. But again, fossil fuels are limited. The consumption thereof is polluting the earth. Basically, climate change is the worst form of that, or the most pressing form of that pollution that we need to address. So we can't continue that.
Right.
Or there's going to be a tipping point. And we're
All the pay.
in that, at the beginning of that tipping point now, as far as I'm concerned. So
Yes. Yes, there will be hell to pay if we do not.
I think the to me, energy, the energy efficiency is a little bit of a myth in my and what I'm saying is, or the benefits a little bit of a myth, because what I'm saying is if we increase the fuel efficiency of cars, for example, or if we transform cars into electric cars, and that process leads to increased efficiency. In other words, it takes less time to produce that energy. Less time is generally equal to less money. That continues the process that we're talking about of making us more efficient. And
It just prolongs the inevitable.
let me well, it accelerates the inevitable actually. So if I take a car and we manage to make that car 50% more efficient, what happens is we, instead of paying, call it $100 to fill the gas tank, it only costs $50. What do we do with that $50? We go out and buy more goods and services. Well, that means more natural resources need to be extracted. Or instead of buying more natural resources, we drive twice as far. I mean,
Right.
both our consumption continues to increase. I support increasing efficiency, but we've got to understand that that is really just accelerating or continuing that acceleration of per capita consumption.
Yeah, and yeah, I think actually.
It is what is enabled this wonderful life that we have, but it is also what's threatening to end it too. So
yes. And this really, we are the choir here for sure. And so this is let's hear from some other folks who might have a thought going on. Go ahead, be bold. Rick.
Yeah, I have to be brief. I'm just popping in. I'm at work, but just a couple of quick reactions. The one about growth and degrowth, I think it's a false dichotomy. We have to think about growth in a multidimensional way. What do we need to grow and what do we need to degrow? And so I think it's more complex. So that's one issue that comes to mind. But coming back to a point that I heard earlier about technology, I've connected two experts in DAOs who didn't know each other. I knew them independently, and they have a little air of interest. And the area that I'm most interested in, this comes to the technology aspects of it, is how can you create a DAO social enterprise that is amplifying human and social and political capital for the greater good, design a better future, yada, yada. So how do we create those sort of learning platforms to be able to amplify it? So I see this organization as in a nascent phase of that, that it needs to think about how can it actually reach out to ever widening circles to extend its influence, and technology such as the one we're using and others can help to do that. I'm just using Clubhouse. I've just restarted again. But anyway, I just wanted to pop in and put my 2 cents to it, and I'll probably get pulled out because I'll have a patient to go off to see shortly. So I thought I would add my 2 cents and let it percolate.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. I wanted
Catherine,
to
what are you thinking? I was
Yeah.
thinking Catherine might pop in.
What am I thinking? This may seem like a segue, but I'm going to say it anyway, because that's where I started this morning, and I'm seeing threads of it here as well. There's such a tendency, and I think this is part of the making wealth without really adding value. There's like 2 levels. There's the grounded level, which has to do with tangible reality, with life, with physicalness, with that. And then there's all this other stuff up here, which we love to play with. And we've become very adept at being able to play up here without ever thinking about what's down here, or even feeling the need to connect with that in any way. We can create whole worlds up here that seem whole and all of that, but they're not connected. And that's the problem that we're having, is that we've sort of overspun this, and it has no way to re-engage with what's real. And it's really forced us to not pay attention to the normal cycles. When you talk about using things within the normal cycle, you have to be grounded in life to do that. You have to be paying attention to the real tangible world instead of all up here. And we've not connected those two. Our economic system is not connected to the real world. It's really worked very hard, in fact, to disconnect, because we can create more wealth by playing up here with all the rules that we've created. But when you come down to the physicalness of the world, there are limits, there are cycles, there are contexts that you have to engage in. And we've been very proficient in stepping out of those things and experimenting. And it's been fun, and it's a good play. And as Gard says, we've created a wonderful life out of that, and it's going to crash because it's not grounded, it's not connected. And it feels like going back, it feels like less, it feels like losing, because all of the stuff up here has to disappear, and we're really attached to that. But it has a richer base. There's time to savor. There's time. That's one thing that really comes back. We're losing time up here because we're trying to go faster and faster instead of being back seated into the natural cycles in a way that really is nurturing and sustain us. But emotionally, that's where we get fed. We don't get fed emotionally up here at all. And so that emptiness becomes a driver for more, because we don't have that connection. So it becomes an accelerating loop, basically, off into the ether, instead of being a grounded accelerating. Yeah,
it's like empty calories,
yes,
food that doesn't
exactly.
have nutrition in it.
Yep,
So you
exactly.
will only naturally want to eat more and more and more, but not realizing that what you're actually looking for.
And they make you feel sick, really.
After a while, that's right.
After empty calories make you feel ill. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the ennui, all of those other emotions that we're feeling about this. It doesn't, it's not satisfying in some kind of way. And that lack of satisfaction is it's not connected to life.
Yeah. And that is, Catherine well said, that is a complete prescription on how to think about urban design in the future. As the world population goes up, there's greater concentration in urban spaces. More urban spaces will come up. And almost all urban spaces are exactly what you're saying, Catherine. It removes you from yourself. It certainly removes you from nature, that's for sure. But it ultimately removes us from ourselves.
Well, we're artificially able to increase our population. If we were grounded in real life, we would not be as many people as we are because the planet can't support it. But we've artificially exceeded that limit.
That's right.
So it's going to be, a painful crash to come back
Like
into
population
relationship.
control is not something that anybody wants to discuss.
Yeah, but well, it's going to happen. We don't have to discuss it. It doesn't matter.
That's right. We're coming to the end of this session. Thank you all. But I wanted to give you a little teaser. Next week, Pam will host a discussion on designing tipping points. So if we're saying that tipping points are a natural way for the movement of complex systems, then we need to also be able to design for them, not just to say, oh, it's going to happen, right? Because as mentioned, at the stage of chaos, we can potentially go in any direction. So if we want to go in a particular direction, we need to know how to do that. Yeah. So come back next week and we'll look to your inputs on how we can design for tipping points. And by the way, Carl, I think Art has probably a lot to say for that. Probably.
Yeah, this has just been a wonderful conversation. We're really getting into the meat of it. And Gerd, nice to have you with us. Please come back. I think that I'll take a look at your website and we're starting to form our conversation for now that we've got all our glossary terms. We're starting to really do the work. And in fact, Gerd, are you aware that we have taped all of these? So could you add that to,
yeah, I'll do that.
Tanuja will add the access to the tapes. And
yes, I'm aware, and I did peruse many of those came on the talk. So.
All right. Well, and Dan with GaiaNet, we hope to hear from you as well next time. And we also do this again tomorrow night, my time, at 6 p.m. Wednesday, Pacific time. We have a repeat of this for the folks in Australia and New Zealand and that part of the world. So
join us if you can, or if you want to. Evening time, 9 p.m. New York time. So
we had someone from Miami last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So see you next week, everybody.
Adios,
Thank
guys.